stance is obviously the opposite of theirs. We believe that they're investing all this money and producing all these green technologies in order to just increase their economy and their exports. So we thought that these two pictures were a really good summary of what's sort of going on. On the right, you can see windmills, which is sort of supposed to symbolize the investment and production of all these great resources. We're not trying to argue that they're not the leading producer in all these things and the leading investor. That's just a fact. We're not trying to argue that. But we're saying that something's happening between here and here. And we sort of look at it like a hospital. They have the antidote, but their country is still the sickest country. So Julie is now going to talk about investment.
Thanks, Dan. So as Dan has mentioned before, and as he mentioned over here, China is placing highest priority in developing its green technology. Since 2009, China is the world's largest investor in green energy. It has invested $330 billion in order to derive at least 15% of all energy out of renewable sources by the year 2020. Right now, they are at 4%. So to put this into perspective, in the year 2005, China has invested $2.5 billion into this energy. So this clearly shows that there has been a shift in focus into investing into green technology. So let's take a closer look at one of those industries, which is the solar panel market. So here, this is nicely shown where the solar power, which is actually being produced in China, is used. On top you see China. So there's only a very small share of domestic use. Where it's being used is in Germany, where they export large amounts of the solar power in order to clean up the nice air in Germany. In 2010, China has manufactured nearly 60% of the worldwide solar panels. It has exported 90% into other countries. It hasn't used it at all. So Wendy, how can that be that there's such a huge gap between production and domestic use?
Thanks so much for your question. And I think two fundamental reasons can account for this rare phenomenon. The first one is their lack, their innovation system in this green energy industry. And the second reason is the inefficiency in the operation and management system of this field. And the third one I would like to focus on and emphasize is the allocation of the green energy resources doesn't match the energy consumption structure in China. As shown in this graph, the resources mainly is in the west part of China, but the energy is mainly consumed in the west and in the east part of China, the development part. So now the problem is that it calls for the huge projects of long-distance transfers of energy, which is risky because of the first two reasons I mentioned just now. And of course, we can try to boost the economy in Western China, but still a long way to go. And the last problem is that they lack the clear understanding of how to coordinate the huge projects of long-distance transfer and the local consumption of the green energy resources in West China. This makes the things worse. In a word, these problems makes Chinese energy consumption still relied on the traditional one, which leads to the pollution problems. And I would like to invite them to discuss more.
Thank you, Wendy. As we all know, coal is the major source of carbon dioxide within all the fuel sources. However, China still uses so much coal in production. 70% of China's production still comes from coal, and yet they're still pushing to build more coal plants and nuclear plants. This brings about the question as to where the regulation is. The MEP, which is the body that tries to regulate the pollution in China, found out that 40% of China's 500 largest companies actually don't comply to the regulations put in place to reduce pollution. Also, they found out that pollution in China is going up by 30% each year, and only 1/3 of the wastewater treatment facilities are being put to full use. This just shows that the regulations are in place. However, the government has failed to crack down on these violators through taxes. And this is the reason why there is still so much pollution in China. Now, guys, would you sacrifice company profits when there are no consequences?
So we've been talking about how China is the single largest investor in green technology. So one would assume, well, the single largest investor in green technology would have one of the cleanest, greenest environments in the world, correct? Well, as Carlo alluded to earlier, over 650,000 people died last year because of inhalation of air pollution. If that doesn't convince you, think about this. Lung cancer, heart disease, respiratory disease, and stroke are all associated with inhalation of dirty air and sewage problems in the water. 80% of all deaths in China last year happened because of those diseases I just mentioned. Birth defects are on the rise. 70.9% of all 70.9% has been the increase over the last 15 years of birth defects. Now, if that still doesn't convince you that there is clearly a problem and the environment is not getting cleaner, think about this. Has anybody heard of cancer villages? These are these large clusters of people in China that have the same type of cancer. There are 450 of these clusters all over China. And in these clusters, these people have the same exact type of cancer. Now, they happen to be located right near the edge of these contaminated waterways and downstream from the industrial parks. Is that a coincidence? Now, some of you might want to argue that China is young, that they're just getting started with the green technology, they'll get a cleaner environment soon. I'd like to beg to differ on that. If you take a look at the map behind me, Germany, back in 2000, instituted the German Renewable Energy Act. This was their first real attempt at becoming a greener country. Now, in the same year, China did the exact same thing with their 3-year Environmental Protection Action Plan. This went on at the exact same time. This was China's first attempt at having a real strong, environmentally green economy. If you look at the map behind you, you can see clearly there are so many fewer deaths in Germany from urban air pollution than there are from China. So why are two countries who are starting the exact same type of movement in the same year experiencing such a vast difference in their deaths of their urban air pollution? So while no one is arguing that China has seen a huge economic growth from their investment and export of green technology, they're doing so, and it's clear that they're doing so at the expense and the health of the Chinese people.